The small hall in Birmingham smelled faintly of roses and candle wax. Yet the sweetness could not hide the whispers that passed from mouth to mouth as Lillian Carter walked slowly toward the altar. She wore a plain white dress, the kind a woman stitched at home with care, not the kind one bought at a bridal boutique. Her veil was simple, her shoes borrowed, and though her steps were steady, she could hear the snickers from the crowd. A nanny by trade, she had cared for other people's children all her life, pouring her love into families who often forgot her the moment she stepped out of their homes. Now, on her wedding day, it seemed those same people came to witness her choice, not out of love, but out of curiosity. Beside the altar stood Jonathan Hayes, the man she had chosen. His suit looked tired, the sleeves slightly frayed, and his shoes had seen far better days. His hair, though neatly combed, could not disguise the wear of long nights under bridges and days spent wandering streets. To the watching eyes, Jonathan looked like a homeless man who had stumbled into the wrong place. A few guests covered their mouths with handkerchiefs as they muttered, "Is this really happening? Did she truly choose him?" The laughter that followed was soft, but sharp enough to pierce through the air like broken glass. Lillian's closest friends sat near the front row, and rather than beam with pride, they exchanged glances laced with mockery. One leaned closer to another and whispered, "She could have had anyone. Why him? Why marry someone who looks like he begged for bus fare outside the station?" The second woman chuckled, shaking her head. "Maybe she thinks she can fix him, like one of the children she looks after. Poor Lillian, so desperate for love, she'll take a man off the street." Their words carried just enough volume for others to catch, and soon small ripples of laughter spread like a secret joke shared among them. Jonathan, standing at the altar, felt the weight of every stare. He had grown used to being invisible on the streets, but invisibility was easier than the ridicule now fixed upon him. Yet when his eyes found Lillian's, walking toward him with unwavering determination, the noise dulled. She had once found him sitting by a bench in the city center, shivering in the cold with nothing but a thin coat. She had offered him bread, then conversation, then friendship. Where others saw only a man stripped of pride, she saw kindness tucked beneath exhaustion, intelligence hidden behind silence, and a spirit still capable of hope. That memory steadied him, even as the guests' laughter pressed on. The vicar cleared his throat and began the ceremony, yet it was clear the couple's vows competed against the restless murmurs. A man in the back scoffed openly, muttering, "This is a mistake. She'll regret this within months." A younger cousin of Lillian giggled loudly, earning a stern look from her mother, but the disapproval never lasted long. Each time the couple clasped hands or exchanged glances, it seemed to fuel more judgment. "Look at her," one guest whispered. "She thinks love will put food on the table." "And look at him," another added. "He can't even afford a tie that hasn't faded." Yet Lillian smiled through it all. She squeezed Jonathan's hand, whispering just loud enough for him to hear, "Ignore them. We know why we're here." He nodded, though his jaw tightened. The ceremony edged closer to the moment of vows, and still the undercurrent of mockery buzzed like bees around honey. Even the photographer, tasked with capturing joy, hesitated with each click, as though uncertain this union deserved the frame. Finally, when the vicar invited the couple to share their promises, Jonathan lifted his gaze to the sea of doubtful faces. The laughter had not ceased. In fact, it swelled with every pause, as though daring him to stumble. Lillian's heart thudded painfully, but she kept her eyes on him, urging him forward. He opened his mouth to speak his vow, but found the words caught in the web of judgment surrounding them. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the creak of a chair, as someone leaned back in smug anticipation. Then Jonathan did something no one expected. He lifted his hand, asking quietly for the microphone. The vicar hesitated, but after a brief nod from Lillian, he passed it over. Jonathan held the mic firmly, his eyes scanning the crowd that had mocked him since he arrived. He did not smile, nor did he shrink. He stood tall, his voice steady as he said, "I know what you see when you look at me. You see a man in a worn suit, shoes that should have been thrown away, and a face marked by days without comfort. You laugh because you believe she is chosen wrongly. But let me tell you, appearances are not always the truth you think they are." The room shifted. The laughter dimmed into uneasy silence. Guests leaned forward, unsure whether to expect a plea, a defense, or a confession? Jonathan's voice carried with surprising strength as he added, "You think you know my story, but you don't. You think you understand who I am, but you have judged me by clothes, by shoes, by nothing more than what your eyes can measure. Today, I will tell you the truth, and you may never laugh again." His words lingered in the air, sharp, heavy, and unshakable. The whispers died completely. Even Lillian, holding her breath, realized something unexpected was about to unfold. The man everyone thought she had rescued from the streets was about to speak his truth, and the entire room sat waiting, on the edge of disbelief, for the story he was ready to tell. Jonathan held the microphone as though it were the only anchor keeping him from being swept away by the tide of scorn that filled the hall. His chest rose and fell with controlled breath, and his eyes no longer darted nervously as they had when he first stood at the altar. Instead, they burned with a calm intensity that quieted the crowd. For a moment, no one dared to speak. Lillian's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing with questions she had never thought to ask. He began slowly, his voice firm but measured. "My name is Jonathan Hayes, yes, but not the man you think you know. For years, I built something many of you might recognize, Hayes Properties, the real estate group based in London. I was not always on the streets. In fact, I was the one writing contracts, acquiring lands, negotiating deals while others slept. I was the man people begged to meet, the one called a millionaire on paper, but one day, I chose to leave all of that behind for a time." Gasps rippled through the room. The name Hayes Properties rang in the minds of several guests, even those who had mocked the loudest. A middle-aged man near the aisle whispered sharply to his wife, "That's impossible. I've seen the company's name on half the billboards in London." Another guest squinted, trying to match the worn suit with the name of a man once pictured in business magazines. The laughter that had filled the room earlier now turned into uneasy shuffles and strained silence. Jonathan continued, his voice steady. "I had everything. People chase, cars, a house you could mistake for a palace, bank accounts that could stretch across continents. But there was one thing I did not have: truth. I could never tell if people around me cared for Jonathan the man or Jonathan the wallet. Every smile, every handshake, every whispered promise of love, it was tangled in the web of my wealth. So I walked away. I disguised myself, abandoned the comfort, and chose the streets. I wanted to know if love, real love, could find me when I had nothing." Lillian's hands trembled. She stared at him, wide-eyed, as the man she thought she had pieced together revealed a story far bigger than her imagination. He had told her fragments of pain, of lonely nights, but never this. She remembered the times she had brought him food, the afternoons they had laughed at silly jokes in the park, the evenings when she had shared her dreams of a family with him. She had loved him for his kindness, not because she thought him rich or important. But now, hearing that he had hidden all of this, she felt the ground shift beneath her. Jonathan turned his gaze toward her, softening his tone. "Lillian, you are the one who sat beside me when others crossed the street to avoid me. You are the one who offered me bread when you had little yourself. You are the one who saw me, not my clothes, not my past, not my failures. You chose me when the world had thrown me away. And that is why I stand here to say I am not ashamed of the man you met, but I am also not ashamed to tell you who I truly am." The audience buzzed, their earlier smirks replaced by flushed cheeks and wide eyes. The same friends who had whispered mockery now straightened in their seats, suddenly desperate to hide their earlier disdain. One of them leaned close to another and hissed, "We should have kept quiet. She's about to be richer than all of us combined." Even relatives who had scoffed now forced smiles, their minds recalibrating, their judgments flipping like coins landing on the opposite side. The vicar, stunned but composed, tried to regain order, yet it was Jonathan's revelation that held everyone captive. People leaned forward as though each word carried gold. But not everyone felt admiration. Lillian's chest tightened, her breath shallow. She whispered under her veil, almost too softly for anyone to hear, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked, trembling with a mix of betrayal and disbelief. Jonathan caught it, his heart sinking. He stepped closer, lowering the microphone, speaking directly to her. "I was afraid, Lillian. Afraid that if I told you too soon, it would change the way you looked at me. I wanted to be certain that you loved me, not the fortune attached to my name. Please, Understand that I never meant to hurt you." But to her, the words were knives wrapped in silk. She loved him, she knew that. But the secret, the disguise, the test he had imposed on her love felt like chains closing in. She turned her face away, blinking back tears. "You should have trusted me," she whispered, her voice quivering. The hall grew heavy with tension. Guests who had come to laugh now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, watching not a spectacle, but a heartbreak unfolding. The earlier mockery had been replaced by silence, but it was a silence thick with awkwardness and guilt. Some looked down at their hands. Others stared at the floor, none daring to meet Lillian's eyes. Jonathan's words filled the hall once more. "I wanted to prove love still existed without wealth. But perhaps in proving it, I risked the very love I hoped to find." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the composure he had fought so hard to keep. The crowd could see it now, the man beneath the wealth, trembling not from poverty, but from fear of losing the woman he loved. Lillian pulled her hand away gently. She looked at him, her face streaked with emotions too tangled to name. Anger, hurt, love, betrayal. She turned toward the aisle, her dress whispering against the floor as she walked. Murmurs swelled as she moved past the rows of stunned guests. No one dared to stop her. She reached the doors, paused only for a breath, then stepped out into the cool Birmingham air. Jonathan stood frozen, the microphone still in his hand, though he no longer spoke. The hall, once buzzing with cruel laughter, now sat in the grip of shock and shame. No one laughed anymore. No one even moved. They had witnessed not just the unmasking of a millionaire, but the unraveling of a love that had once seemed unbreakable. And as Jonathan lowered the microphone to his side, his shoulders heavy, he knew that the hardest battle was not convincing a room full of doubters. It was convincing the one woman who had given him hope in the first place that his love, despite his mistake, was real. The evening air outside the hall was cool and sharp, brushing against Lillian's cheeks as she stood under the shadow of the old oak tree near the entrance. The distant hum of Birmingham traffic filled her ears, yet inside her chest was only the thundering sound of her heartbeat. She had dreamt of this day being quiet, tender, perhaps imperfect, but sacred. Instead, it had become a storm, and she was the one drenched in betrayal. Her hands shook as she clutched the folds of her dress, torn between love that still pulsed fiercely within her and the bitter sting of secrets Jonathan had kept. Inside the hall, Jonathan's figure remained rooted at the altar until his best man gently touched his shoulder. He blinked back to the present, realizing she had truly left the room. For a man who had walked away from empires, from boardrooms and glass towers, this was the first time his legs felt weak. Not from hunger, not from ridicule, but from the fear that the only woman who had ever loved him genuinely might slip away for good. The days that followed stretched long and unkind. Lillian returned to her small flat, where children's toys still lingered from the families she worked for. Each evening she folded tiny clothes, prepared bottles, and hummed lullabies for infants who weren't hers. Yet beneath the routine, her heart throbbed with unanswered questions. Why hadn't he trusted her enough to be honest? Why had he made her feel like part of an experiment, instead of a partner? When she laid her head down at night, she could still hear his voice steady, pleading, full of truths hidden too long. Jonathan, meanwhile, refused to vanish. He sent letters, each one written in his neat hand, not with the pomp of a businessman, but with the humility of a man stripped bare. "I am sorry for testing what never needed to be tested," one note read. "I only feared the world's shallow love would touch you too. Please, let me show you who I am, fully, without disguise." He visited her flat once, standing at the threshold with a bouquet of lilies, her favorite. She accepted the flowers but closed the door gently, whispering, "I need time." Weeks slipped into months. Jonathan returned to London, to the offices he had abandoned, but he no longer fit comfortably into the sharp suits and polished shoes. His boardroom applauded his return, investors cheered, yet he felt hollow. Every skyscraper that bore his company's name reminded him of her absence. Lillian, too, carried the weight of what had happened. Though her friends now treated her with sudden reverence, sending messages laced with envy, she ignored them. Their laughter at her wedding still rang in her ears. She wanted no part of their shallow approval. It was on a rainy afternoon in early spring that Jonathan made his boldest gesture. He called Lillian and asked, simply, "Will you meet me?" Hesitation lingered, but something in her heart told her to say yes. She arrived at St. Martin's Church in the Bull Ring, where they had once shared quiet prayers during their early friendship. He was waiting, no longer in rags, but not in silk either, just a simple navy suit, clean and humble. "Lillian," he began, his voice trembling as though every word carried the weight of his soul. "I failed you. Not because I was poor, not because I was rich, but because I did not trust the love you had already shown me. I dressed my fear as wisdom, and in doing so, I hurt the one person who saw me truly. I am sorry, and if you can forgive me, I want to give you not wealth, not reputation, but the life you deserve, one where honesty lives in every corner." Her eyes welled with tears. For weeks she had rehearsed anger, prepared speeches of refusal, but standing before him now, she saw not the millionaire or the man in rags. She saw the Jonathan she had first met, the man who listened, who laughed at her small jokes, who held her hand as though it were fragile glass. "I don't care about Brooks Estates or palaces or any of that," she whispered. "I only wanted the truth. Can you promise me that, Jonathan? Not riches, not fairy tales, just the truth." He stepped closer, holding her hand carefully. "From this moment on, you will never have to question who I am. You will never wonder if I am hiding behind wealth or fear. You will have me as I am." It was not immediate forgiveness, but it was a door opening. Lillian nodded softly, her tears falling freely. "Then let's try again. But this time, let's do it differently." And Jonathan did. He poured his heart into planning a second wedding, not as a performance of wealth, but as an offering of honor. The invitations carried no golden embossing, no proud declarations. Instead, they were simple notes written in his own hand, inviting only those who truly mattered to her family, a few close friends who had not mocked, and children she had once cared for, their tiny voices eager to see Nanny Lillian in a gown again. The day arrived, held in a garden blooming with spring roses. Lillian's dress shimmered modestly yet beautifully, the fabric flowing like water under the sun. Jonathan stood waiting, not in a flashy tuxedo, but in a tailored suit chosen to reflect dignity rather than wealth. Guests gathered, not in mockery this time, but in quiet admiration. The very air seemed to hum with reverence. As they exchanged vows, Jonathan spoke words that would etch themselves into every heart present. "Today I marry you, not to prove anything, not to test anything, but because you are my truth. You saw me when no one else did. You loved me when the world turned away. And I promise that for every day of our lives, I will honor that love with honesty, patience, and kindness." Lillian, her voice trembling yet sure, replied, "I marry you, not because of what you own, but because of who you are. We will build a life together where love is the wealth we treasure most." The applause that followed was not laced with irony, but with genuine warmth. Even those who had mocked them before wept openly, humbled by the power of love revealed not in diamonds or carriages, but in forgiveness and truth. Children tossed petals in the air, their laughter ringing like bells, and as Jonathan kissed his bride beneath the arch of roses, it was clear this union had grown stronger not despite the trials, but because of them. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, they danced slowly under strings of lights. Lillian rested her head on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Jonathan whispered against her hair, "We made it, love. And this time, no secrets." She smiled, her arms tightening around him. For the first time, both felt free, two souls bound not by disguise or wealth, but by the simplicity of truth and love. And in Birmingham, their story spread quietly, told not as gossip but as legend. It reminded people that wealth without sincerity was emptiness, and love without honesty was fragile. Their second wedding became not a spectacle of riches, but a testimony of resilience, forgiveness, and the kind of love that could weather storms and still bloom. Moral lesson: true love is not measured by wealth, nor destroyed by hardship. It is tested in truth, strengthened in forgiveness, and crowned in honesty. Lillian and Jonathan's story teaches us that appearances deceive, judgment wounds, but love that endures with patience and sincerity creates a legacy brighter than gold. Let this be a reminder. Never laugh at what you don't understand, never measure someone's worth by their clothes, and never forget that love thrives where trust lives. If you felt touched by this story, remember to like this video, subscribe for more tales, share with your friends, and comment on what you've learned.